good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. And we're going to start this now. Thank you very much for joining the PRCA event. I'm in Kampala, Uganda. It's an hour behind Southern Africa, and I'm happy to see people from across the continent joining this. Today is an incredibly exciting day because we want to share ideas on how we can change the African narrative. Our narrative, sadly, is dictated by what people see and hear across the world. And then when they come to the continent, they're wondering, where is what I see? And even their understanding of how our continent lies. A war in West Africa, they say, I can't go to East Africa, there is a war in Africa. And that's right across the continent. And even recently, I saw a map of our continent and then the map of the world. And Africa looks like a small continent. We are the second largest continent in the world. It's an incredible thing, but we are represented even at that level. So today, we want to hear the voices of our people from across the continent. They're in South Africa and they're in Ethiopia, and all of you who have joined us to hear their ideas and share ideas. All of you who have joined us who are not panelists, I'm going to speak to the panelists first, and then we start taking any questions that you may have for them. You can type in the questions. If we're doing well in time, you can put up your hand and maybe I can get to allow you ask your question live on air. So Africa, welcome to Africa Changing Our Narrative. I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I have two ladies and the gentleman. So for once, the gentleman is going to go first and introduce himself. Okay, the lady is going to kill me. I'm too far away. You won't get me. And introduce yourself, and then I'll ask Christine to introduce herself, and then the final panelists will join us. So over to you guys.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is Leul Mcconnen from Spotlight, Ethiopia. I'm the head of comms and PR at Spotlight and the CEO of Spotlight. Happy to be with you all.
Welcome. Okay, Christine.
Hi, everybody. It's so exciting to be talking to everybody today. I am Christine. I am the creative group head at Razor PR, all the way down in South Africa. We are a very creative agency, and which is why we are so excited to talk about how we can change Africa's narrative, because there's just so much magic on this continent. So thank you for being here, and yeah, let's chat.
And Justine.
Juliet.
Juliet, sorry.
Not Justine. Hi, everyone. I'm Juliet Tshele. I'm account director at Razor PR, looking at the corporate portfolio. I work quite closely with Christine, and I'm very excited to be on this panel and to give our overview and expertise from a Razor perspective as Africa's most awarded agency for the year. So we're quite excited, and we're looking forward to a robust conversation.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for accepting to do this. I want to begin by picking your brains and asking you one approach that you'd have to get Africa's narrative to change. What do you think are key things that we can celebrate and tell the world about our continent? And I'm not going to follow any order. Okay, I'll ask Christine to start, because you're nodding your head. You're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm listening to you.
After that, the rest of you, please jump in and let's get this conversation going.
I think it's such an interesting conversation to start with, because Africa is such a vast, vast continent. It's so hard to box it into one thing. I mean, we are completely stereotyped as a land of poverty, corruption, failing infrastructure, and conflict. Like you were saying, for an international audience, if they hear that there's a war in Africa, it's almost as if they believe the entire continent is at war and they can't come. But I mean, the continent is made up of so many countries, and each country is so incredibly diverse. So we're home to brilliant innovators, creatives, startups, technology hubs, renewable energy pioneers, agripreneurs, even healthcare. I mean, we are trailblazing in the healthcare sector. But I think for me, what excites me the most, and obviously we can't speak about all these different sectors, but for me, creativity is really such a massive currency that we can start using to trade with the world. I think that our creativity is so raw and so authentic, and we have an audience in front of us who have very little understanding of the mother continent and the potential that can actually flow from this cradle of creativity. So it's very exciting because the creative expressions of African people are such a complex blend of all the unexpected that bring to light their personal perspectives. So we're talking about everything from the mundane to like the completely out there and obscure. And I think a lot of people believe that African creativity is made up of beaded trinkets at airports and, animal loincloths that you'll find at nature parks, wooden carved statues and woven baskets. And that's where it ends, but it certainly does not end there. And I think that, we have this authentic creativity that just resonates and really has the potential to stop people in their tracks. But the beauty about it is that it's all rooted in talent and craftsmanship that is centuries old. So it's so completely authentic right now. And that's what the world's looking for. We have these stories and histories and legacies that change from South Africa right up through to the top. I mean, there's so many different stories, and it's not just the story of Africa. It's a different story for every single African person. And we can bring them to life in ways that tangibly impact and influence the world. So from a South African perspective, because that is my Africa, I'm from South Africa, we have some examples that just blow my mind, to be honest. We had an entrepreneur that was born in a tiny little coastal city called Port Elizabeth, and he pioneered this technology that enables a wind-up radio so that people don't even need electricity to be able to listen to a radio. They can sit in their homes when we don't have electricity, because electricity is a problem here. And they can wind up his radio manually, and his family can still actually be connected to the rest of the world. And then you think about people like Trevor Noah. I mean, he's internationally renowned. He's with these fresh narratives. The DJ, Black Coffee. I mean, he's making waves across the world. Who would have thought that he would have won a Grammy? It's just unthinkable, because he's from South Africa, this tiny little place where we are so far behind, apparently. There's just endless examples of creativity coming from our continent right now. And I think it just opens up these massive opportunities across the board. So it's also really exciting for me because we are a complete pillar of growth. We have a labor force that can grow between 12 and 16% every half decade to 2050. So if you think about that, and those numbers, they're actually quite staggering. We're looking at about 20 million jobs across the country that need to be created to support these people who are looking to transform Africa economically or socially. It's actually incredible. So there's never been a more exciting time, actually, to start telling our cultural stories and break down these singular views of all of those who hold the monopoly over ideas and creativity, and allow our own voices and our own storytelling to beat to a completely different drum. And I think it's a drum that nobody's heard before. And it's a drum of self-expression, creative license to prosper within a globally competitive creative economy. So in a nutshell, that is why I'm so passionate about creativity, and I think it can really, really change the world.
You are extremely passionate. One point I wanted to wave to you to interrupt you, but I just didn't want to let the ball stop rolling. And do you know something you just said about Trevor Noah? His script writer is from Uganda.
I mean, I didn't know that, and that is just amazing in itself.
Africa's Got Talent, and they're rocking that show. So let me go to Addis Ababa and hear your thoughts, and from your city. And so we come from Southern and gone to the heart of Africa, to the Horn of Africa.
Thank you, Henry. You know, I don't want to repeat anything Christian said, but jumping off of her point, some of the facts some of the progress Africa is making, if you're not paying attention, you will really be surprised. For example, you know, Africa's recent unprecedented growth combined with the natural resource, the exceptional ambition and entrepreneurial aspect of its youth, it's something to marvel at. For example, in mobile technology and mobile-oriented solutions, Africa is leading the world in terms of healthcare, e-commerce. You know, Europe is still using cards to pay for payments. In Kenya, almost 100% of every transaction made digitally, whether on text or mobile platforms. So Africa, in some aspects, has completely moved on from, you know, the world perception of Africa. So that's really surprising. And in terms of focusing, it's my firm belief Africa is the most diverse, the most action-packed, and politically, culturally, and economically, the most complex continent on the entire face of the planet. That's my firm belief. And if you go through certain statistics, like Kristen said, you will really be surprised, and you would think these facts are about Asia, not Africa. For example, if you go to, for the past 2 decades, the majority of mainstream depiction of Africa, if you go to CNN or BBC, up to 75% of their perception of Africa is negative. And for any investor that wants to join this continent, you know, with the natural resources, the ambitious and entrepreneurial youth Africa has, no one would, in their right mind, will join Africa or see Africa as, you know, a business destination to be explored, you know. So it's really surprising in terms of, for example, I'll give you one example in terms of tourism. In Ethiopia, the last year we've gone through a civil war, a conflict that has costed us so many lives in the northern part of the country. But that conflict has been localized in the northern part of the country. And I was shocked to go to CNN, the likes of New York Times, the Washington Post, and read about my own country as if the capital city has fallen and, you know, it's under the control of rebellion fighters. That's really surprising. And I hear someone reporting from Nairobi or Johannesburg, where Christine and Juliet are sitting, and think as if because you are somewhere in the continent, you are reporting from the ground. So these things need to be changed. We need to own our own stories. We need to report from the ground. African voices need to tell their own story. I firmly believe the only people who are qualified to talk about African events, African matters, African nuances are Africans living on the ground. So we need to take hold of our own story. It's one of the sad facts about our continent is that Africa is the only few places on earth at the moment without its own home-based, home-owned, multinational news agency servicing the continent's needs, owning our own story. So it's a sad fact, but happily it's a digital age at the moment. So we can own our story, we can create our own content, we can move away from, you know, the traditional mainstream media platforms and create our own story in the new digital era. So I see that to be a huge opportunity in terms of telling our own story and shaping our own narrative.
Thank you, Leul. You've been very provocative, and I think a good part of our second part of our discussion is going to be a lot on the media part of it and what we need to do. So I'm so tempted to ask you a question, but I want to go to Juliet first and hear Juliet's thoughts, and then we'll tackle the media issue later on. Juliet.
Cool. So in my point of view, there are 3 areas that we need to really hone on in order to own our narrative and actually have an impact. The first is we need to establish the audience. Because so often we speak of the West being in such a generic format that we never really identify exactly who we're talking to. Then we need to identify our audience here. Who are we using as advocates to drive a positive story, to drive positive impact? And Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, 70% of the population is under 30. If you look at those people, they are digital adopters. They are mostly digital natives, in fact. And the mediums that they use are not necessarily traditional media. I mean, there are quite a few people under 30 who are taking up their time to go open a newspaper. They're in a more digital frontier. How are we using those mediums to tell a more positive narrative? So we need to be very distinctive on the audience externally and the audience internally. And by the audience internally, I mean our brand advocates who are going to push a more positive narrative. And another point that we need to completely focus on, I actually wrote my points down, so I'm trying to create a flow of thought. Another point that we need to be very conscious of is what exactly we're talking about, because we all see a positive narrative, but it's not clear what the proof points are for the positive narrative, what the proof points are for the diversity. It's good to have diversity of thought, diversity of age, of relation, however you see diversity, but what in that diversity are we using to drive an impactful story? Because if that is not clear, we'll continue having this conversation around changing the narrative without actually having impact. And lastly, we need to own creative capitalism. At the end of the day, we are a continent that's completely behind economically, behind in terms of infrastructure, behind in terms of resources. So how are we using our problems to get a solution? So are we shifting more towards social entrepreneurship and looking at creative solutions that drive a positive narrative? So it also has to be tangible and not just talking for the sake of talking. So it goes back to the idea around creative capitalism, using the social impact or the social entrepreneurship we have to create proof points for a positive African story while knowing exactly who we're talking to frame a positive narrative. So we need to connect to those 3 dots. Otherwise, we'll continue having debates like this or having discussions like this without actually materializing them into something impactful and something that goes back into business economy and fueling our broader growth. So that's essentially my take on it.
Can I just actually jump in there, Juliet, because I really believe 100% what you're saying is true. And I think we've got so many positive proof points that aren't always highlighted. I mean, I'm going to take for an example, vaccine rollouts. So the Kingdom of Eswatini did one of the most successful vaccine rollouts because they had the infrastructure from rolling out their HIV antiretroviral drugs. And just the creativity in thinking about that, it's almost like design thinking. So we've already got this infrastructure. Let's now use it. And I mean, it was infrastructure that was developed almost in a very negative time, HIV drugs, and we had to get them to the people. But it resulted in this network of sort of care facilities and distribution facilities and providers who managed to roll out their vaccines so successfully. It was one of the most successful African vaccine rollouts. And that for me is combining creativity with functionality, and it's a proof point. It's a proof point that we actually can do it. if we actually just apply some kind of proper thinking. And I think the rest of the world needs to see that and understand that.
Exactly. So without the proof points, I mean, we'll just kind of have a futile discussion. So we're in complete alignment and agreement there. But I would also like to hear from an Addis perspective, because I actually was in Addis before the pandemic. And I remember the airport was still being redone. And the biggest thing, it was Addis was going to be our next African tourism destination, and then the war hit. So the question that I would have for Leul is, how are you trying to change the narrative from an Addis point of view? Because the tourism factor has kind of low down to some degree. Let's make it practical and see how you're doing it in your country.
Okay, before you take the question, I'd just like to tell the audience listening to us that I'll be responding. We've got some questions in the chat box, and I've got a hand up as well. So at 1:30, I will begin taking questions, because I've still got a couple of questions I want to ask you guys. But Leul, just answer Juliet's question before we do that.
Okay, I'll keep my answer brief. One of the things in terms of promoting tourism in Ethiopia and what Ethiopia has to offer, this past year we've been partnering with the Ethiopian Airlines, which is the continent's flagship carrier, I believe, and this is what we've been working on. This is a culinary book. Ethiopian Airlines has launched its Fly Go Organic campaign, and we've been responsible for designing the strategy campaign, the comms campaign, since the Ethiopian Airlines is the cultural exporting medium of Ethiopia, as it were. We've tried to collect, I think it's more than 85 cultural representations in this book. If you don't know, in Ethiopia, there are over 85 languages being spoken, and with those languages comes their own culinary and historical background. So we've tried to collect in one book all of Ethiopia's national dishes and how they are being prepared, and how anyone, for example, if Christine got a hold of this book, she will be in 1 or 2 weeks' time an expert cook of Ethiopian traditional dishes. So that's one aspect of trying to export our tradition, our unique contribution to this world, and this needs not be adapted from Turkish airline or Emirate airline tradition. We can tell our own story. We just have to understand what the Ethiopian airline represents for us, what Ethiopia is. So whenever Ethiopian Airlines flies to Dubai, whenever Ethiopian Airlines flies to the US or Indonesia, it will be a brand ambassador to export these traditions, these unique contributions to the world that Ethiopia or Africa has to offer.
Thank you very much for that. Here's a question, and I'm throwing this out to the three of you, and you'll give me brief answers. We haven't emancipated ourselves, our minds. We've got so many Africans on BBC, but they report for the BBC. They don't give an African perspective. And so all our countries, we haven't yet committed ourselves in, and I think, Juliet, what you said, we'll keep on talking about changing the narrative. Do you feel we've committed that we have committed ourselves, or do we need to do more as countries, and our leaders need to do more to emancipate us? And we don't think that, oh, this is the way the British like it, or the way the Americans like it. And Leul's point just now about organic food is another aspect. We want to eat the burgers, eating with our hands, this is who we are, So how can we, or what ideas do you have that we can start emancipating our our minds, as Bob Marley said in one of his songs. Open to you all, jump in.
I'll jump in first. I think you're right. I think the problem is that we do not commit 100%. I think that as Africa, we want to wear the engagement ring, but we don't want to go through with the marriage. And I think we are very, very focused on Western culture and trying to fit in and trying to find a space in there, which actually just isn't authentic. And I think we're reaching a stage where people are realizing that. And I think that the people and who are really starting to shine across the country are the ones who are going back to their roots. It doesn't matter where they're from in Africa, but they're going back to their roots. They're going back to who they were, and they're re-looking at those stories and those legacies and those histories. And they are then going from there. They're developing from there, and they're actually realizing it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to be African, because for a long time it really wasn't okay to be African because of these terrible stereotypes. But now they're realizing it is okay, and they're starting to shine. So I think for me, it really, really is rooted in authenticity. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there.
From my point of view, it's our role as strategic advisors is to be honest with our clients as well. Because our clients have the big budgets to push the narrative, and our role is to help them facilitate the conversation honestly and in the most fair and authentic representation to the audience and also to the brand. So I think this one of the solutions, obviously we don't have all the solutions because they're regulatory in some point and more political, but as strategic advisors, it's our role to facilitate the conversation, to push our clients into having uncomfortable moments and taking the risk. Risk pays off if you do it right, and also if you have the most honest and sincere team as well. And diversity of thought and identity and culture and nuance is very important in the team as well, as in any organization, because that really frames what goes out there. We've seen the likes of H&M become tone deaf. We've seen Dove become tone deaf and completely alienate their audience and perpetuate a narrative around audiences or African people that we do not align with. So I think it very much sits with us, and the responsibility is also on us to have a fair and impactful conversation, and to also remind our clients that reputation is key, but you don't always have to be safe. You can still be creative, to Christine's point, and to the point I made earlier around creative capitalism. And so I really think it sits mostly with our role as strategic advisors.
Thank you. Leul, do you want to comment on that?
Maybe, briefly responding to the question at hand, I think we need to take a closer look at ourselves. I believe more often than not, we end up feeding into the typical African stereotype as content creators or as communicators in this market. For example, if you see the Nigerian market, especially the film industry, it's the biggest film exporters in the African continent. But since all of their content is now literally owned by Netflix, if you want to make it in that film industry, you better fall in line and produce content that is palatable for the Western platform or the Western media. So we end up feeding into the stereotypes, and we don't liberate our content and story and make of it what we will, and so it can depict who we are as people, who we are as a nation. For example, in Ethiopia, that's one of the steps we're trying to take. In September, we are about to launch Ethiopia's first ever streaming platform. So Netflix is not a player in this market, or Amazon Prime. So when we launch in partnership with the Ethiopian Filmmakers Association, it will be a great leap forward in terms of owning our content, before the likes of the Canal Plus or the Netflix does. So owning our content and shaping and staying away from feeding into the stereotype is, I think, a first step in a long journey, I believe.
Thank you very much. We've got some questions from the chat box, and Christine, I'm going to give you this first question because it's right down what you said. And Chris lazily asks, how do we best socialize African creativity to other parts of the world that goes beyond the loincloth and the lion?
Well, I think the most important thing is understanding that it's actually okay to leave the loincloth and the lion behind, because I think for a very long time, Africa is hidden behind the stereotypes. We've actually used the stereotypes to almost create a safe space for us, because if we had to drop the loincloth and the lions and that's a very South African stereotype. So I'm speaking from a South African perspective here, but if we drop those, then what's left, and I think a lot of people have thought that. But when we have seen people actually drop the lions and the loincloths and really start speaking authentically and creating authentically and putting themselves out there authentically, the response globally has been phenomenal. And I think that's the most important thing. Just that I'm repeating myself a lot here with the word authenticity, but it's very important to me, because I think once you actually feel safe enough to let that go and be your most authentic, creative or entrepreneurial or, pioneering self, then what you are creating, people haven't seen before. And it touches them in a place that's right in the feels, it's right in the heart. And it actually doesn't matter then whether you're from Africa or Australia or Asia or anywhere. Now you're connecting on an authenticity level, because you've actually found something that resonates. So for me, to answer Chris's question, it's drop the loincloths, let go of the lions, and actually just create or just, trailblaze, or just pioneer, or just be authentic Africa, and let the world see it.
Yeah, and Christine, people respond to authenticity. If we just look at the adoption of TikTok, all the content is quite authentic. Most of it is not as rehearsed, it's not a big production. It's people at home just having fun. And the authenticity has garnered so much interest from the world. So yeah, just to reiterate to your point, authenticity is key. It's respected, it's engaging, but it also builds connection, which is the most important thing.
I want to read a comment, Nicola Pykestra. I hope I've pronounced your name right, Nicola. I find it frustrating that many of our African experts trash talk our continent when they move abroad. We understand the challenges in Africa, but an international audience doesn't. Our own people are actually amplifying the poor reputation of Africa to rationalize why they left when they could be sharing opportunities. A fantastic point from Nicola, that it's extremely selfish, and those are some of the people Leul was mentioning when they, was it to yourself or Christine mentioning when they get BBC's or CNN is getting opinions about something. Those are the guys they found there. They can't hack it here, so they run away and live in Europe, and they don't live a good life. I have a question for you. Leul is experiencing some internet issues, so until I hear from him, I won't send a question to him. But Leul, if you hear the question, you can jump in. So I'll ask this one to Juliet. What is the influence? It comes from Bongi Kile Nkomo. What is the influence of Western and European culture on the way we tell our stories? Did you get that? Did you get that, Juliet?
Yes, I did. So to answer Bongi, This one is a bit of a toughie because every media interaction that we've had has been influenced by the West. If you look at TV, we watch American TV shows. We know that the 4th of July is Independence Day in America, for instance. So I think it really goes back to owning our own medium, which is not quite easy in terms of resources, but we live in a digital era. We now have to find a way to create content that appeals to us all, and in the same way that the Western and European mediums have, because they've dominated entertainment, they've dominated pop culture, they've dominated fashion, they've dominated even the adverts we've seen on TV. There was that whole thing where adverts would come from abroad and they'd just tweak the voiceover, and it'll still be the same thing. And you think to yourself, oh, we don't do that here. So it's really around being specific about the medium that we own and using it to have a very solid creative content strategy as well that is authentic, to Christine's point, and still speaks to cultural nuances the way Leul did with Ethiopian Airways, and still very much so African. There is no way to classify African, you just feel it. You'll feel it with the heat, of course, but in general, it's something that it's a spirit that you feel. So I would say it's really around owning a medium and having strong creative content strategy that is still creative, engaging, and authentic.
I'm just going to jump in here, Juliet, because I just wanted to say, I think for a very long time, a lot of Africans thought that the only way that they would ever be noticed is by replicating Western media, things that we'd seen. So for many, many years, it was the only way that we could get noticed. If you saw an American television, you had to speak with an American accent. If you wanted to become an actress who won an Oscar for her role in Monster, you had to learn how to speak like an American. And now we are in such an exciting time where digitally we are becoming one digital tribe. We really are. And you don't have to ride on the coattails of Western traditions and Western things to take you further. I mean, just for example, and I mean, this is a whole different discussion, but the Metaverse, for example, every single person on earth is standing on the precipice of the Metaverse, and we're all 100% the same. We're all at the starting gates. There's no country or color or religion or anything like that stopping anybody anymore, and there's no preconceived conception of what you have to be successful. And I think that is why we have this opportunity now to change the narrative, because we've got so many more platforms and avenues and ways to actually explore who we are and get it out there. And now we should really be taking advantage of that.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, Leul, in Addis. And unfortunately, the person didn't put a name. It's an anonymous attendee, but it's got a fantastic question. How can the next generation of communication professionals help to make the change you're talking about? You are talking about, absolutely about, he says. What is our role? So what can the next generation do?
I think first we have to start being very honest with ourselves. For example, and touching on the previous question, how we think, how we analyze information, how we analyze cultures has been drilled into us that I, sitting in Addis, have already a stereotype working in my head what the Nigerian culture will be like, or what South Africa will be like, or Senegal for that matter. So education is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. We need to re-educate ourselves on the continent. What is South Africa like? What is the northern part of Africa like? What, for example, how many of us know that Ethiopia has never been colonized? How many of us know interesting and empowering facts about South Africa, Senegal, Mali, Chad. So for me, it starts from the basic principle of, Pan-Africanism. We need to relearn about our continent. We need to re-educate ourselves about our continent before we try to speak about our continent or trying to craft any form of narrative. Because since from birth or since the age of media consumption, the way we see Africa has been drilled into us. I see stereotypes. And if you walk around in Addis and ask any random person, what do you think of a Nigerian person will look like or sound like, he will immediately give you an answer that will fit into a stereotype that will address a South Sudanese person, a person from Mali, South Africa, or Nigeria. So education is at the heart of it. And cultural exchanges, I think, is undervalued within our community. Everyone wants to travel abroad. Anyone and everyone wants to visit Dubai first, not Lagos, not Nairobi, not Sudan. So cultural exchange and re-educating our people and our selves on the primary. Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, can hear you.
Yeah, so I think it starts from education. Before we try to communicate what Africa is to the rest of the world, we need to re-educate ourselves and start from cultural exchanges in terms of a bilateral relationship between countries and cultures, I believe. So,
thank you.
Basically, what I'm saying is there is no quick fix to this problem we are in. So it's a gradual journey, and we can't engineer a social movement. It has to be incremental. It has to be really rooted in the right knowledge and the right skills about Africa.
Thank you very much. When you're saying that, you reminded me of a joke we have here in Uganda. If the conference is in Addis or in Nairobi or in Lagos, the minister sends the assistant minister. When the conference is in Geneva, the minister goes themselves.
That's true.
Guys, I have a question that I'd like you all to share. And we only have about 13 minutes. It's from Sharon Kalimba. And she asks, what are the tried and true habits you would recommend for the next generation of PR professionals and content curators? What are the tried and true habits you would recommend for the next generation of PR professionals and content curators? This time I'm starting with you, Juliet.
I'll go ahead with this one. I think the first is, and it seems obvious, but consistently read, have an understanding of the landscape that you're operating it from, a political point of view, an economic point of view, a consumer point of view, a social point of view, and just as a human being, from a human point of view, because sometimes we look at information from a statistics point of view and we don't see the human story behind it. And I think secondly, it's very important to understand the behavioral economics of the audience that you're talking to. So it's the combining of the economic stance and the socio-economic being and psychology, because it's very important to understand the mindset of the person that you're talking to and how you'd want the message to land with them so that is impactful. It drives meaningful behavioral change. And I also think do not underestimate the power of collaboration and authentic thinking. Authentic thinking is not just creating new ideas, it's also being open to a diverse way of working, diverse way of engaging. And I think that's extremely critical, because then you start creating campaigns and informing narratives in a way that meets the psychological element, but still connects to the human heart element, and still has a meaningful impact for your brand, or for the client, or for whatever narrative that you're looking to place forth. So in a nutshell, for me, it's having an understanding of the context, and having a clear understanding of the behavior and the psychology of the people that you're talking to, that you're looking to engage with. Yes, that's essentially it.
Thank you. Christine.
Yeah, I just want to actually go on what Juliet said. I think that PR professionals now, African PR professionals, actually have quite a tough job. We have to understand such nuanced perspectives across the continent. No longer can we just write a piece about a place on the continent and just send it out and think that it's going to get picked up without actually understanding. Education is so important. So I think for me, the tried and true habits would be education. I think some of our greatest communicators in history just, they're highly educated. And I'm not talking about in terms of schooling, and that they're educated in the human condition. And I think that's really important. And I think truth, honesty. Some of our greatest communicators have also really had to be honest. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But the world is waking up to the power of honest communication. And I think that if we can stick to that and honestly communicate educated views about Africa, we can slowly but surely win them over, win the world over.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
No,
Yes.
Leul couldn't hear me. While I wait for him to come on, Christine, somebody has a direct question for you. He says, or she, anonymous attendee again, Christine mentioned the metaverse. How can we use this to change the African narrative?
Well, I mean, the metaverse is opening up a whole landscape. I mean, think about Ubuntu land within the metaverse, where we can actually go in there, and we're not going in there anymore as secondary citizens guided by Western ideas that we've had to live with for centuries just to be heard. This is a whole new world where we can step into the metaverse in our own power, and we can actually start our own conversations and build our own world in there as Africans. We don't have to be dictated to, we don't have to apologize, we don't have to take on a different sort of, persona to be accepted. There are no rules there. And I think that if we are all starting from a place where there are no rules about who we are meant to be, it is the one time we can actually be who we are. And I think when we do that, we're going to own our space in the metaverse. And I think Africa has the potential to actually lead the charge. People are going to be wanting to be like us in the metaverse. And it's going to be a complete opposite of what the real world is at the moment. And if we can lead the charge authentically, creatively, with our entrepreneurial skills and ideas and innovations, we're gonna win.
We're coming to the tail end of today, and I remember just how bad our narrative is. When the COVID broke out, everybody says, my God, when it gets to Africa, it's going to be a total devastation. And it wasn't. And somehow God put his hand over us and we were blessed. Now, which comes to, I would like to use our last minute to, if you had a shopping list of what would you want to see done to improve our narrative? Leul is back. He mentioned we have no control on the media. The Middle East set up Al Jazeera, and they started telling the story from an Arab perspective, and everybody is running there. And I think Hillary Clinton got into trouble for saying it's the only news she watches because it's the only real news, not opinions as they have on other channels. So guys, in your last few minutes, you have a shopping list. What are the things that we need to do to get our narratives changed? Leul, you've just come on. I'm going to ask you to lead on that one. We literally have 6 minutes, so you have 2 minutes each, guys.
Sorry, Henry, did you ask if I had a wish list?
Your shopping list. If that,
okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat the question again?
What I said is that we're coming to the end of this program.
Mm-hmm.
What would be on your shopping list to change Africa's narrative? You had already mentioned our media houses. We need to have media houses telling our story. What else would you put in that list?
That's a tough one to put it in simple terms. After all, this goes back to my previous point. In the Arab world, in the milieu Al Jazeera operates in, it's really easy to create a media platform that is strong in Arabic, strong in English. But when it comes to Africa, the problem is manifold. And forget Africa, you can't create such strong media outlets in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, you have over 500 languages, not to mention the dialects being spoken. So if there is anything I would wish for at the moment is, I don't know, strong cultural exchanges. This right here, what we're trying to achieve is a stepping stone. I would like to see more of these types of efforts being carried out across the continent. I think that will be a realistic stepping stone.
Thank you very much. Juliet.
Oh, this is a bit of a difficult one. The list is endless. Geez, I think I'm in agreement with Leul. More cultural exposure and more resources and our own. I'd really love our own media house, the same as Al Jazeera, something that we can own. So I wouldn't say media house, but our own medium. It doesn't necessarily have to be as traditional, and to be more bold. I think sometimes we're bold and then something happens, then we quiver back to our shell, because now we have to think about the impact that we have to deal with. So I think to be more bold and to be more culturally nuanced and to be more connected and have robust, frank conversations that are actually impactful. So talk that is impactful.
Thank you. Christine.
I think for me, mine is a little bit different. So I really feel like space must be made for Africa to flourish. There needs to be space for us to flourish. Our developmental pathways just can't be left to chance. And I think one of the things that is going to help us flourish as a continent is investment. We need investment in Africa. And I'm not talking about, I'm talking about traditional investment, but I'm also talking about investment in other spheres. People must become more invested in what we can produce. They must become more invested in our creativity, more invested in the possibility of science and technology and innovation, which can really produce the African Renaissance that we all want. So it's one thing for me, and it's really just for people to realize Africa's potential and to invest in our continent.
I want to read the last message we've just got from Lisa Naylor. And she said, "How amazing that you can even mention God. Amen, amen. This was a very useful session, and may we win this. I watched the Kenya elections through local media, and comparing to what BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, using Kenyan-based reporters, I realized how the content was so inaccurate to suit Western audiences. Thank you for this campaign. God bless you all." What a wonderful message that we can end with. It's been absolutely fantastic to listen to your idea. And for PRCA to put this together Joe, your video is off. I think you need to put in the video. The whole of Africa needs to see you and see what you are doing to make it work. I think the consensus is we need to have more people. We need to continuously challenge ourselves, and maybe we should use our PR connections across the continent to bring some of our leaders to these conversations so that they can hear what we are saying and some action can be taken. I was moderating on behalf of a partner to this, the Africa Public Relations Association, which is headquartered in Nigeria. I'm the Secretary General. I'm based in Kampala. Our next conference is in Lusaka, Zambia. This year we were in Dar es Salaam. The next year we'll be in Lusaka. And I know that South Africa wanted to bid to host next year, but because they've hosted it before, Lusaka got the chance. And it's important that we continuously take part in these conversations to tell our story. So, final goodbyes as you wave your hand, Christine. Say goodbye to Africa, and then Juliet, and then Leul. One last message. Take home message. What can I go with?
Thank you for listening. I really believe that the impact of these conversations, it's really getting these conversations started. And the impact of these conversations is really just going to give rise to Africa in a whole new way. So thank you so much.
Same here. It's been a pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, carry on.
It's been a pleasure spending the afternoon in a very productive manner. Thank you, Christine, Juliet, Henry, and everyone who was responsible for organizing this. Have a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, I think from my end, thank you, everyone. And as we always say at Razor, the question I leave you with is, what is your most powerful conversation?
Guys, I was very intentional in running this ship this way. They always say Africans don't keep time. We have kept time to the hour. I needed to show them, go and tell them. We have kept time, guys, and that is us. Have a great weekend ahead of you, and stay safe, stay well, and preach. Tell the message, send the message. Thank you very much. And to all who joined us, thank you for being with us on this webinar. Joanne, thank you. Take care, guys.